What would you do if the person you brought into this world turned around and tried to take everything you spent your whole life building? I was seconds away from losing everything, my home, my savings, my dignity, until I revealed a truth so shocking it made the judge's face go pale, and my son looked like he'd just swallowed fire. The courtroom in Ashbury, North Carolina, was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in spirit. It smelled like old pages and bitter coffee, like a place that had seen too many heartbreaks carved into its wooden benches. I sat stiffly, the back of the bench pressing into me like punishment. My fingers clenched the strap of my worn leather purse, the same one I'd carried for years, because in that moment it felt like the only piece of my world that was still mine. Across from me stood my son, Nathaniel, my Nate, my sweet boy, who once cried when he lost his teddy bear and held my hand crossing every street until he was 9. But now he was avoiding my gaze like I was just some woman off the street, just a name on a legal document. He stood beside his attorney, a man too polished for his own good, wearing a silk tie and a smirk that made my stomach churn. I swear if he'd pulled out a cigar and leaned back with a villainous chuckle, it wouldn't have surprised me one bit. And right in the center of this storm, my late husband's will. The paper that was supposed to bring peace had somehow become the match that lit this courtroom on fire. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. Because this story, it isn't just mine. It could be yours too. Somehow in Nate's mind, I'd become the enemy. Isn't it strange? You raise a child, wipe their tears, read them bedtime stories, stay up all night when they're sick, and then one day they sit across from you in court trying to take everything you ever worked for. I kept staring at him, searching his face for a trace of the boy who used to run to me after school, backpack bouncing, eyes sparkling. But all I saw now was coldness, sharp, calculated. It felt like a punch I never saw coming. The judge banged her gavel, and the room hushed like a storm had just paused. Nathaniel's lawyer jumped up, all drama and flair. His voice carried like a stage actor's, dripping with rehearsed outrage. He called me reckless, said I couldn't manage finances, that I was wasting what my husband built. I almost laughed, if I hadn't been so close to crying. This man had no idea how many nights I stretched $20 into dinners for a week. He didn't see me counting pennies in the grocery store line, but he stood there, wagging his finger like he knew me better than I knew myself. And then Nathaniel spoke. His voice didn't shake with pain. No, it shook with pride, performance. "She'll ruin everything my father worked for," he said, staring straight at the judge. This from the same boy who once sobbed because I wouldn't let him eat an entire tray of brownies before dinner. And now here he was trying to take everything his father and I built with decades of sweat and sacrifice. But what Nathaniel didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had a card he didn't see coming. And when I played it, everything would change. The courtroom around me blurred. It felt like I was sitting in a dream I couldn't wake up from. Strangers nodding, whispering, judging. I wanted to scream, "Do you really think I'm the villain in this story?" But I stayed quiet, because in a place like that, losing your temper doesn't win you anything. It only proves their point. So I folded my hands in my lap, my knuckles white. I kept my breath steady, and I waited. I waited for my moment. But as the minutes dragged on, my mind slipped away, back to when things made sense. I remembered the early days with Robert, my husband. We didn't have much, but we had love, and somehow that made the cracked tile floors and second-hand couch feel like treasure. We built a life brick by brick, dollar by dollar, and every sacrifice we made it for Nate. The pride on Robert's face the day he finalized his will still sits in my memory like a photograph. He was organized to the bone, everything labeled, everything planned, every backup had a backup. He trusted me. He chose me to carry on what we built, not just because I was his wife, but because I had earned it. And now I was sitting in a courtroom, listening to my son argue that I didn't deserve it. If Robert had been alive, he would have laughed that smug lawyer right out of the room. But all I had now was his memory and the quiet courage he left behind. I looked at Nathaniel again. I hoped, maybe just for a second, I'd see the boy who used to curl up next to me when thunder scared him. But that boy was gone, and in his place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who would soon regret ever dragging me into this courtroom. You won't believe the secret I revealed next, the one that made the whole courtroom stop breathing. Stay with me. Part 2 is where it all begins to turn. The courtroom air had turned thick, like you could slice it with a butter knife. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. The judge shuffled her notes. Nathaniel's lawyer leaned back, adjusting his perfect little tie, looking so confident it made my skin crawl. But inside me, something was rising. Not rage. Not yet. Just something stronger than fear. Maybe it was the ghost of Robert's steady voice in my mind. Maybe it was knowing that the truth was sitting quietly in my purse, waiting to be heard. As the attorney rattled on, painting me as careless and unstable, I zoned out. Not out of weakness, but because the past came flooding in, memories I didn't ask for, but needed in that moment. I saw the flicker of candlelight across our tiny kitchen table in 1979, when we had just bought our first home. Robert was grinning ear to ear, holding a bottle of cheap wine like it was liquid gold. We danced barefoot across those scratched floors that night, laughing like fools. God, I loved him. That memory burned bright against the cold glare of the courtroom lights. I remembered how Robert planned everything. Lists on the fridge, notes in his planner. He once labeled our Tupperware cabinet like it was a science lab. I used to tease him for it. Now, I'd give anything to see one more post-it in his handwriting. After he got sick, he sat me down at that same kitchen table. His voice was gentle but firm. "Marla," he said, "I told you I changed the names. When I'm gone, I want you to be safe. I want you to be certain. No guessing." He walked me through every line of the will like he was reading a bedtime story. Calm, clear, loving. He left everything to me, and inside the folder, tucked carefully between the legal jargon, was a note. Not typed, not notarized, just his handwriting, full of love. It read, "Because you always made this house a home." Even now, just thinking about it, my eyes sting. That note still lives in the drawer next to my bed, worn soft at the corners from how many times I've opened it just to feel him close again. But to Nathaniel, this house wasn't a home. It was a number, a transaction. Maybe I should have seen it coming. Even as a child, Nate always wanted more. The newest video games, designer shoes, parties that stretched our grocery budget until I was eating peanut butter sandwiches just to keep his cake 3 layers tall. I tried to teach him the value of things, the joy in earning. But guilt is a heavy backpack that mothers carry in silence. Did I give in too much? Did I say yes when I should have said no? Nights after Robert passed, when the house felt like a museum of echoes, I'd wander from room to room, my fingers brushing along furniture like they were fragile pieces in a story I wasn't ready to close. The chair where Robert read the newspaper, the old curtains we chose on a whim, the crooked picture frame in the hallway that never stayed straight no matter how many times I fixed it. It all whispered us. So when Nate started making comments, it caught me off guard. "Mom, don't you think this house is a bit much for you? Then you could sell it, you know. Might be smart. And finally, what kind of savings are you working with anyway?" At first, I thought he was worried. I wanted to believe that, but his questions turned sharp, surgical. He wasn't asking. He was calculating. I tried to explain gently that his father had made his wishes clear, that this home was mine, that Robert had trusted me. But Nate didn't hear me. He wasn't listening, and that was when I knew. He wasn't grieving his father. He was grieving the money he hadn't gotten. It hit me like a silent punch, how he looked at Robert's will like it was a locked door, and I was the key standing in his way. And yet I still asked myself, did I fail him? Did I love too hard? Or not enough? I replayed everything. Science fair projects. Bedtime songs. The day he broke his arm falling off the swing set, and I slept on the floor beside his hospital bed just to be close. I was there. Always. But love doesn't guarantee loyalty. People choose who they become. You can guide them. You can pray for them. But you can't rewrite their hearts. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about respect. About a voice I had silenced for decades to keep the peace. As I sat in that courtroom, drowning in polished lies and rehearsed cruelty, something inside me snapped, not in a loud, angry way. No, it was quieter than that. It was the sound of enough. I remembered Robert's belief in me. I remembered every sacrifice we made. And suddenly, I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew what I had to do. I reached into my purse and touched the thing that would end this war before it even began. Wait until you hear what I revealed next. The secret even my son didn't know existed. The moment that turned the entire courtroom on its head and left my son speechless. I could feel Nathaniel's eyes boring into me, waiting for me to crumble. But I didn't. I sat up straighter. I adjusted the collar of my cardigan like I was just tidying up before dinner. I wanted to smile, just a little, because I knew something that no one else in that courtroom did. I wasn't empty-handed. The judge's voice broke the tension like a crack in glass. "Mrs. Harlow," she said, using my name like a challenge, "do you have anything you'd like to say?" The room hushed. Not just quiet, silent. Even the air seemed to pause. I stood slowly, feeling every year of my life in my knees. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear but gentle. "But before I speak, I believe there's something you need to see." And then I said the words that flipped the entire room upside down. "Check the video." For a beat, no one moved. Then the judge blinked. "Video." Nathaniel's smug expression faltered for the first time all morning. His lawyer sat up like someone had yanked his chair out from under him. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small flash drive, unlabeled, ordinary. But I knew exactly what was on it. A secret recorded months before Robert passed. The judge gestured for the bailiff to bring her a laptop. My fingers trembled just a little as I handed over the drive. Not from fear, but from release. From relief. From the weight I'd been carrying finally shifting off my chest. While they set it up, I stared at Nathaniel. He stared back, confused, but beneath that confusion I saw it, a flicker of worry. He had no idea what was coming. And when the screen lit up, neither did anyone else. There he was, my Robert. His face was thinner than I remembered. The illness had already begun to take him. But he still had that same gentle fire in his eyes. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and looked straight into the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, his voice low and even, "then something's gone very wrong." The courtroom froze. "If someone is contesting my will," Robert continued, "and if that someone is Nathaniel, well, I'm not shocked." A quiet ripple of gasps and shuffled feet spread across the benches. I glanced at Nate. His mouth had fallen open. His lawyer looked like someone had just thrown cold water on his head. And Robert, he kept speaking, plain and true. "Son," he said, "your mother is the reason we ever had anything. She is the one who kept us fed when we had nothing. She made this house into a home. I left everything to her because she deserves it, because she earned it. And if you're fighting that," Robert paused, staring into the lens with an almost unbearable stillness, "then shame on you." I felt the burn of tears in my eyes, but I didn't blink. I wouldn't look away from the man I loved. Robert wasn't finished. "You want money," he said. "You'll make your own. But you will not. Take it from the woman who gave you everything." The video ended. The screen went dark. But the silence screamed. The judge looked stunned. Her jaw set. Her lips pursed like she was swallowing fire. Nathaniel, pale, like all the color had been drained from his face, like someone had cut the strings on a puppet and left him dangling. I couldn't help it. A tiny, bittersweet smile touched my lips. You see, Robert always planned ahead. Always. He had hidden that tiny camera in the bookshelf, right behind a copy of War and Peace and this hideous ceramic turtle I always begged him to throw away. And he'd recorded that message the night he updated his will. He never said a word about it, not even to me. I didn't find it until months after the funeral, on a rainy afternoon while cleaning out his study. It was buried in a drawer under envelopes and old receipts. A flash drive, labeled in his handwriting, for emergencies only. At the time I thought it was tax files. Passwords, maybe. But when I plugged it in and saw his face fill the screen, I wept. In the courtroom, the judge spoke again. I believe Mr. Harlow's intentions are more than clear. Her eyes pinned Nathaniel to the bench like a hawk. This court will honor them. And just like that, it was over. I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, letting the weight of it all lift. A slow, shaking breath escaped my lips. I had done it. I had protected Robert's wishes. And I had found my voice. What happened after the verdict? Let's just say, not everyone left the courtroom with their head held high. And the final moment between me and Nathaniel? You'll never forget it. When the judge's gavel came down for the final time, it was as if a spell had been broken. The room started to move again, papers rustling, feet shifting, chairs creaking. But I sat frozen in place. My breath caught in my chest, not because I was scared anymore, but because I was finally free. I looked across the room. Nathaniel didn't move. His face was still pale, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. That self-assured, smug expression he'd worn like armor all day? Gone. In its place, a boy I no longer recognized. And yet, somewhere in his eyes, there was a flicker. Maybe regret. Maybe shame. Maybe just the sting of being caught. His lawyer, who had practically strutted into that courtroom hours earlier like he was walking onto a stage, now looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. The poor man tried to gather his files, but his hands fumbled, clumsy with disbelief. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. There was no joy in watching your own child fall apart, not like this. There was just a quiet ache, the kind that presses behind your ribs when you're trying not to cry in public. As the courtroom emptied, I stood slowly. Every movement felt heavy, like walking through water. I reached for my purse, and for a moment I felt Robert again, his calm presence, his belief in me, wrapping around me like a coat in winter. Nathaniel turned toward me. Our eyes met, and for a split second, just one, I saw him. The little boy who used to run down the hallway with his pajamas trailing behind him, laughing, arms outstretched. The boy who begged me to stay in his room. Just 5 more minutes, Mommy. The boy who once brought me a dandelion and said, "It's for you, because you make everything good." But it passed. That flicker vanished behind a wall of shame and pride. His face hardened again, his mouth twisted like he wanted to say something, but didn't. Instead, he stormed out of the courtroom. He didn't look back. The ache in my chest deepened, but I stood tall. Because even when love shatters, dignity remains. His lawyer followed a few steps behind, no swagger left in his walk. If I hadn't remembered the arrogant grin he wore just hours before, I might have felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered how confidently he called me unstable. How he sneered through his teeth when he said I didn't know how to manage money, as if I hadn't raised a child, survived a marriage, buried a husband, and kept a roof over our heads during years when we had nothing but a leaky faucet and each other. So no, I didn't feel sorry. I felt proud. Not the loud kind of pride, the quiet kind. The kind that fills your chest when you realize you stood your ground, even when your legs were shaking. As I stepped outside the courthouse, the winter sun hit my face. The cold bit at my cheeks, but I didn't flinch. It was over. But it wasn't really over. Because healing, that takes time. Nathaniel may have walked out, but the space he left behind would take longer to close. Not because I didn't love him, I did. God, I did. But because sometimes love isn't enough to make someone do the right thing. And maybe it never had been. I stood on those courthouse steps, letting the wind rush past me, and I thought, so this is what strength feels like. Not revenge, not rage, just the soft, undeniable certainty that I had protected what mattered. I had honored Robert's wishes. I had honored myself. I didn't know if Nathaniel and I would ever be okay again. That kind of betrayal leaves cracks, even if forgiveness comes. But I did know this. I was no longer shrinking. I was no longer the silent woman in the background of someone else's life. I was Marla Harlow, widow, mother, fighter. And for the first time in years, I felt free. What happened when I got home? Let's just say the house didn't feel the same. But something beautiful happened in the kitchen. Something I'll never forget. Part 5 will show you a side of healing that might surprise you. The door creaked open with the same familiar groan it always had. Funny, isn't it? How some sounds feel like home. That tiny whine of the front door hinges, the soft click of the lock, they were the same as always. But that day, they felt different. The moment I stepped inside, the silence wrapped around me like a thick blanket. Not heavy, not suffocating, just still. For months after Robert passed, this house felt like a mausoleum of memories. Every creaky floorboard whispered his name. The empty chair by the window always caught my eye like he might still be sitting there, newspaper in hand, coffee steaming beside him. But after that courtroom, the silence didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like peace. I slipped off my shoes, dropped my purse onto the entry table, and stood in the living room just breathing. The couch still had the throw blanket, folded the way he used to do it. The bookshelf still had that awful ceramic turtle peeking out behind the classics he loved. And suddenly, I laughed. A deep, almost surprised laugh. The kind that escapes your chest before your brain catches up. Because for the first time since Robert's funeral, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. Not of being alone. Not of growing old. Not of losing the house, the memories, or even the version of motherhood I had clung to for so long. I had already lost more than most, and I was still standing. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a generous glass of wine, one of the nice bottles I'd been saving for a special occasion. Well, today was special, wasn't it? I turned on the radio. Just some oldie station that played the same 4 songs every other hour. And then it happened. The opening chords of Unchained Melody drifted through the speakers. I hadn't heard it in so long. Not since Robert and I danced to it in the kitchen on our 40th wedding anniversary, barefoot, with a chocolate cake half frosted on the counter. The lump rose in my throat before I could stop it. But I didn't cry. Instead, I danced. Right there on the worn linoleum, next to the oven with the squeaky door and the cabinet that never closed right. I twirled. I closed my eyes. I imagined Robert's arms around my waist, his warm breath at my ear. I remembered the way he always hummed along, slightly off-key, but so full of love that I never dared to tease him about it. The room blurred as I spun, gently in place. My cheeks flushed. My hands lifted like they used to in the slow dances of our youth. For a few minutes, I wasn't the woman who had just stood her ground in court. I wasn't the grieving widow or the heartbroken mother. I was just me, alive, late, laughing. And when the song ended, I stood there smiling to myself, wine glass in hand, heart beating strong. Of course, the next morning, my knees had something else to say about all that twirling. I groaned, rubbed them, and chuckled like a woman twice my age. Worth it, I muttered aloud, stretching and grinning like a fool. Sometimes we forget joy lives in the small things. The music, the memory, the freedom to dance when no one's watching. And sometimes, after surviving a storm that nearly took you out, the most rebellious thing you can do is laugh and dance anyway. The next few days brought unexpected surprises. Calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. But one knock at the door caught me completely off guard. and reminded me that not all bridges burn forever. The next morning, I woke up with aching knees, a sore back, and the kind of sleep that only follows emotional war. I shuffled to the kitchen, still barefoot, still smiling, and still humming that song from last night like it was stitched into my bones. And then the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. Thought maybe it was another solicitor trying to sell me extended warranties on appliances I no longer owned. But something in me said pick it up. Hello. Marla Jean Harlow, is it true? Came the voice on the other end, high-pitched and already buzzing with nosiness. I blinked. Cynthia. Yes, Cynthia, my cousin, the same one who once tried to convince me to invest in her essential oil pyramid scheme and had the nerve to call it a business opportunity for powerful women. Girl, I saw your name in that little court column in the Ashbury Gazette, she said, barely pausing to breathe. I nearly dropped my croissant. Tell me everything. I had barely opened my mouth when the doorbell rang. Hold on, I told her. I opened the front door and nearly burst out laughing. There, sitting on my porch like a rainbow-colored tribute to passive-aggressive Southern guilt, was the largest fruit basket I had ever seen. We're talking pineapples, kiwis, pears, mangoes, starfruit for heaven's sake, all stacked neatly into a tower taller than my kitchen counter. The cart attached? Thinking of you, Loretta, your favorite sister-in-law. Oh, Loretta. We hadn't spoken since Christmas 2 years ago, when she accidentally gave Nathaniel a $1,000 check and forgot to get me so much as a candle. But now, I guess courtroom drama had jogged her memory. I brought the basket inside, still holding the phone to my ear as Cynthia buzzed in my other. And don't even get me started on the part about the video, Cynthia shrieked. A secret message from the grave? That's better than TV. My neighbor Sheila thought you made it up. I sighed, smiling despite myself. It's real, Cynthia. Every word of it. And then came the knock at the back door. Now, mind you, no one knocks on the back door unless they're either family, a childhood friend, or a raccoon with good manners. I peeked through the curtain, and there stood Marge. Oh, sweet nosy Marge from down the block, the woman who could turn a missing Amazon package into a full-fledged neighborhood scandal. She was holding a casserole dish and wearing her signature "I come with news" expression. I opened the door and she marched in like she owned the place. Macaroni and cheese for kinds of cheese, no breadcrumbs, because I remember you hate crunchy pasta. Now sit down, Marla, and start talking. I nearly dropped the fruit basket. Between the calls, the casseroles, and the sudden arrival of every person who hadn't cared 2 weeks ago, I realized something. Drama brings people out like honey draws bees. But underneath the chaos, something beautiful began to emerge. Neighbors stopped by with pie. One brought fresh flowers from their garden. Even the mailman handed me my letters with a little wink and said, "Glad justice came through, Mrs. H." It was the kind of quiet support you don't expect. People didn't always know what to say, but their gestures said it for them. We see you. We respect what you did. You're not alone. And after months of feeling like I was screaming into a void, that mattered. It really, really mattered. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by casseroles, half-eaten fruit, and 100 tiny notes from people I hadn't heard from in years. Was it all a little ridiculous? Sure. Did it feel like being hugged by the whole town at once? Absolutely. But just when I thought the dust had finally settled, an envelope arrived in the mail when I wasn't expecting. And what it said inside, well, it stopped me cold. It arrived on a Thursday. You know the kind of day I'm talking about. Gray skies, a soft drizzle on the window, slippers on my feet, coffee in hand. I had just finished rearranging the pantry for the 3rd time that week, not because it needed it, but because the silence had grown too loud again. The mail slid through the slot with its usual clunk. I wasn't expecting anything. Maybe a catalog, a bill, or another overly cheerful letter from that cruise company that insists I've won a trip I never signed up for. But there it was. One envelope. No return address. No name on the front. Just my name, handwritten in sharp, familiar strokes. I stared at it for a long time. There was something about that handwriting. It pulled at something deep in my chest. I knew it. I felt it. I slid my finger under the seal, careful not to tear it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The words were few, but they hit like thunder. I didn't know Dad recorded that. I didn't know you still had that note. I'm sorry, Nate. For a moment, I couldn't move. The letter didn't come with flowers. No phone call. No dramatic apology on my doorstep. Just words. For lines. And somehow, they cracked me wide open. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where I had fed him spoonfuls of mashed peas, patched up scraped elbows, helped him with school projects, and cried over my morning coffee after Robert died. And now I cried again. But not from pain this time. This time it was different. These were tears of relief, of hope, of longing for a future I had almost given up on. I didn't rush to reply. I didn't even know how to. Because forgiveness isn't a switch. It's a slow breath, a soft step, a cautious reaching out in the dark, hoping someone's reaching back. But this letter, this was something. It wasn't redemption, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, well, they're worth holding on to. I folded the letter carefully, delicately, like it might fall apart if I moved too fast. I placed it in the drawer next to Robert's note. One from a husband who believed in me. One from a son who was trying to find his way back. Side by side. And maybe, just maybe, one day they'd be read again, not through tears, but through healing. What happens when the heart starts to open again after everything it's been through? In Part 8, I'll tell you about the unexpected visitor who brought more than just comfort. He brought a truth I didn't know I needed. It was late afternoon, and the light outside had that warm, golden glow that makes everything look softer, like life's holding its breath. I had just put on the kettle when there was a knock at the front door. Not the back door this time. The front. Firm. Steady. 3 short knocks. I wasn't expecting anyone. I dried my hands on a dish towel, feeling a strange flutter in my chest. Not fear, just that quiet anticipation that creeps in when something is about to change, and your heart somehow knows it before your mind does. I opened the door, and there he was, Caleb, my late husband Robert's best friend, the man who had been there for our wedding, who held Robert's shoulder, steady the day we buried his father, the man who stopped coming around after Robert passed because his own words, I didn't know how to sit in the silence with you. We hadn't spoken in nearly a year, but here he stood, a little more gray at the temples, a little slower in the way he moved, but the same steady eyes. He held a small paper bag and a sheepish smile. I brought lemon pound cake, he said, and a few things I've been meaning to say. For a second, I just stared. And then, without thinking, I stepped aside and opened the door wider. Come in, I whispered. We sat at the kitchen table, where everything always seemed to happen in this house. The tea steeped beside us, forgotten. The cake half-eaten. And Caleb? He just talked, softly at first, about Robert, about how hard it had been to come back into this house, how guilty he'd felt for disappearing. And then about Nathaniel. Apparently, Caleb had spoken to him. Not recently, but not long after Robert died. And he told me something I didn't expect to hear. He wasn't angry at you, Marla. Not really, he said, looking at his hands. He was lost. Grief's a strange thing. It twists people. Nathaniel thought you were fine because you were strong. He didn't know how to be. I blinked hard, but the tears still came. He thought I didn't need him, I whispered. Caleb nodded. And instead of asking you how to help, he turned away. I exhaled, shaky and slow. It didn't excuse what Nathaniel had done, but it cracked the door open a little wider. It reminded me that even pain has a root. Even cruelty often grows from confusion. We sat there for what felt like hours, talking, laughing a little, crying more than a little. And then Caleb said something that will stay with me forever. You didn't just survive, Marla. You stood your ground and reminded all of us, especially Nate, that love doesn't mean giving everything away. Sometimes it means holding the line. That hit me like a soft punch to the ribs. Because he was right. All those years of shrinking myself, of softening my voice, of swallowing hurt just to keep the peace, they ended the day I looked a judge in the eye and told the truth. And somehow, that truth had made its way back to me. Through lemon cake and tears, and the voice of someone who once stood beside my husband and now stood beside me. When Caleb finally left, the sun had dipped low in the sky. I walked him to the door, and just before he stepped off the porch, he turned and said, "Robert would have been proud of you." My throat tightened, but I smiled. "I know," I said, "and I finally believe it." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold and looked at the drawer where both Robert's note and Nathaniel's letter now lived. 2 pieces of paper, 1 legacy, and in between them, me, a woman who had survived the storm, who stood alone but no longer felt lonely, who danced in her kitchen, who opened the door when the past knocked and listened. What comes after healing? In part 9, I'll tell you what I wrote back to Nathaniel and the one thing I never expected to hear from him in return. The envelope sat in front of me for nearly an hour. Blank. Quiet. Waiting. I'd already written the letter 3 times. The first one was too angry. The second one was too soft. The third, it felt right. It felt true. I read it one more time, slowly. "Nate, I got your letter. I've read it at least a dozen times. You didn't know about the video. You didn't know about the note, but you knew who I was. Or at least you used to. You forgot that I am the woman who raised you with everything I had. The woman who patched your knees and stood in the rain to watch your soccer games. The woman who held this family together when the world felt like it was falling apart. I'm not writing this to hurt you. I'm writing this because I still love you. And I need you to understand that love doesn't mean saying yes to everything. Love means protecting what matters. And that includes myself. What you did in that courtroom cut deep. But your letter, it opened something. Not a door. Not yet. But a window. And if you're willing to keep it open, so am I. Love, Mom." I folded the letter carefully like it was something fragile. Like it might break if I handled it too roughly. I sealed the envelope and placed it gently in the outgoing mail tray by the door. Then I exhaled, not just a breath, a release. It felt like setting something down I'd been carrying for far too long. The next few days were quiet. No phone call, no message. I didn't expect one right away. Sometimes healing doesn't come in fireworks. Sometimes it comes in silence and waiting and allowing space for the hurt to settle so the heart can finally speak. But then, 5 days later it came. Not a letter. A phone call. I saw Nathaniel's name on the screen, and for a moment my heart froze. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But I did. "Hi," I said, barely above a whisper. "Hi, Mom," came his voice. Quiet. Broken in the edges. Like someone trying to hold something together that was already cracked. "I got your letter," he said. "I've read it a dozen times." I smiled, tears already rising. "Same," I whispered. There was silence on the other end. A kind of silence that didn't ask for words. "That just sat with you." Then he said something I hadn't heard in months. "I miss you." My breath caught. And then the next words, the ones that made my hand fly to my heart. "I messed up, Mom. I was scared. And I didn't know how to face everything after Dad died. I didn't want to lose you too. And somehow I almost made that happen." I closed my eyes and let a single tear slide down my cheek. "I know," I whispered. And for a moment we both just breathed. 2 people, broken and rebuilding 1 heartbeat at a time. We didn't solve everything that night. This wasn't a movie ending, but it was something real, honest, a beginning. We talked for nearly an hour. About Dad, about grief, about the space between love and loss. And by the end of the call, when he said, "Can I come visit soon?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." I hung up the phone and looked at the 2 letters in my drawer. Robert's, Nathaniel's, and now the one I sent in return. 3 voices, 3 truths. But in that moment, the only sound I could hear was peace. In part 10, I'll tell you what happened when Nathaniel finally came home, and the one place in the house that brought both of us to tears. I don't remember cleaning the house that day, but everything was spotless. The good towels were hung in the bathroom. The lemon-scented candle was burning on the mantel. I even fluffed the throw pillows on the couch like it would somehow make the room more forgiving. And the kitchen, oh, the kitchen, that's where I set the table. Not fancy, not dressed up, just 2 plates, 2 forks, a warm casserole in the oven, his favorite, the one I used to make when he got good grades or came home with a bruised ego from middle school. I still remembered exactly how much cheese he liked. Too much. I kept glancing at the clock. My hands trembled every time I checked the time, even though I had nowhere else to be. Then finally the knock. 3 soft knocks. I walked slowly to the door, heart pounding. Knees weak in that way that made me feel 17 again, but not from romance. From fear. From hope. From grief. I opened the door, and there he was. Nathaniel. He looked older. Not in the face, but in the eyes. His smile didn't come easy like it used to. His shoulders sagged a little, and he was carrying something invisible, something he'd probably been dragging behind him since the day Robert died. I didn't rush to hug him, and he didn't rush either. We just stood there, looking, breathing, healing in real time. Finally he said, "Hi, Mom." And I nodded. "Hi, sweetheart." He stepped inside, slowly like the walls might judge him. But they didn't. Neither did I. Not this time. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same place that had held birthday cakes, bills, family talks, and too many silent mornings after Robert passed. We ate quietly at first. He complimented the casserole. I smiled. It was safe, easy. And then, halfway through the meal, I noticed him staring. Not at me. At Robert's chair. The old wooden one with the armrest, worn smooth from years of coffee cups and crossword puzzles. It was still there. I hadn't moved it. I hadn't been able to move it. Nathaniel set down his fork and blinked hard. "I didn't expect to miss that chair," he whispered, voice cracking just enough to twist the knife in my heart. I reached across the table and rested my hand over his. "You don't miss the chair," I said gently. "You miss him." And then came the silence. Thick, holy, real. His lips trembled. He looked down. And finally, he let the tears come. "I thought I was angry at you," he choked out. "But I think I was just angry that he left. And you stayed strong. And I didn't know how." "Oh, my sweet boy." I stood up, rounded the table, and pulled him into my arms. He wept, head on my shoulder, shoulders shaking, breath hitching like he was 8 years old again and had scraped his knee too deep. I held him, not because I'd forgotten what he did, but because I remembered who he had been and who he could still be. That's what mothers do. We remember both, and we hold the space between. We sat like that for a long time. 2 broken people finding something whole in the middle of our hurt. After a while, he wiped his face and gave me a small, crooked smile. "I'm sorry I tried to take everything." And I smiled back through my own tears. "You didn't," I said. "You just forgot what really mattered." And in that moment, we both looked at the chair again. And somehow it didn't feel as empty anymore. There's one more piece of this story. What happened when Nathaniel asked the question I never expected? In part 11, I'll tell you what he said, and the answer I almost couldn't give. The casserole had gone cold. The dishes sat untouched in the sink. The house had gone quiet again, but not the heavy, lonely quiet. This was different. This silence felt like peace was settling into the walls, slowly, cautiously, like it was asking permission to stay. Nathaniel and I were sitting in the living room now. He'd moved to the armchair, the one Robert always called his thinking chair. I hadn't let anyone else sit in it since he passed. But tonight, I didn't say a word, because somehow it felt okay. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together like he was holding something fragile between them. He'd already apologized. He'd already cried. But there was something else sitting behind his eyes. A hesitation, a wait, and then, after a long breath, he said it. "Mom, do you think we'll ever be okay again?" My chest tightened, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I did, and I knew how much it would cost to say it out loud. I looked at him, my son, my betrayer, my baby boy, the one who dragged me into court, and the one who just cried in my arms like he had as a child when his father missed bedtime. And I thought about everything. The scraped knees, the birthday parties, the look on Robert's face when he first held him in the hospital, the sound of his little laugh echoing through this house, the months of silence, the courtroom, the lies, the letter, the tears, all of it. Could we ever be okay again? I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out into the fading light. The yard was still. The porch swing moved just slightly in the wind. "You know what I think," I said softly, not turning around. "I think we'll never be the same." Nathaniel didn't respond, but I continued, "Maybe, just maybe, we can be something new." When I turned to look at him, there were tears in his eyes again, but they weren't tears of guilt this time. They were tears of hope. "I don't need us to go back," I said, walking back toward him, sitting across from him again. "I need us to go forward." He nodded slowly. "I want that." We sat in that truth together, no need to fill the silence. And then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made my breath catch. A folded piece of paper. Worn. Soft. He handed it to me. "I found this in one of Dad's old notebooks," he said, his voice almost breaking again. "I think it was meant for both of us." I opened the paper slowly. It was in Robert's handwriting. "To the two people I love the most. If you're reading this, then something didn't go according to plan. But here's what I hope. That you find your way back to each other. That you remember love is never about being perfect. It's about showing up again and again, even when it's hard. And that no matter what happens, you both know this house, our home, is built on something stronger than pain. It's built on us. Robert." I pressed the letter to my chest and wept. Not from grief, from release, from redemption. Nathaniel leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine like he used to when he was small. We stayed like that for a long time. And in that moment, I didn't see a courtroom. I didn't hear lawyers. I didn't feel the betrayal or the hurt. I just saw a son, and I felt love. Messy, complicated, but still alive, still real, still ours. In the final part of this story, I'll tell you what healing really looks like, and the one moment that reminded me how far we'd come and how worth it the fight was. It had been 3 weeks since Nathaniel came home. No, not came back. Home. The days that followed weren't filled with grand gestures or dramatic apologies. There were no swelling music scores, no slow-motion embraces. Just little moments. Small, quiet things that carried the weight of mountains. He stopped by every few days, never unannounced. Always with something in hand. Groceries, flowers, a new light bulb for the back porch he'd noticed had gone out. Once he brought an old photo album. We sat at the kitchen table flipping through the pages, laughing through misty eyes as we stared at blurry birthday parties, Halloween costumes that no longer made sense, Robert holding baby Nate with such pride it hurt to look at. The kitchen had become our space again. The same room that had seen dinners, disasters, arguments, and years of silence was now alive with something else. Something like hope. One evening, I stood at the stove stirring a pot of soup when I caught a reflection in the window. Nathaniel was behind me, quietly replacing the burnt-out kitchen light. It had flickered for months after Robert died, and I never got around to fixing it. But there he was, not saying a word, just fixing the light. Something about that simple gesture made my throat tighten. It was nothing, really, but it was everything. Because that's what healing looks like, isn't it? It's not the courtroom verdict. It's not even the letter. It's a son replacing a bulb in the kitchen where his mother once held the weight of his father's death and his betrayal. It's standing side by side without needing to say, "I'm sorry," for the 100th time. It's showing up. Again. And again. We had dinner that night. Nothing fancy. Just soup, bread, and quiet smiles. And somewhere between the second helping and the last sip of tea, he looked at me and said, "Thanks for not giving up on me." I laughed softly, blinking back tears. "I almost did." "I know. But I didn't." He nodded. "I'm glad you didn't." Later that night, after he left, I stood alone in the kitchen and turned off the overhead light. But the room didn't go dark. The kitchen light, the one he'd replaced, still glowed gently above the sink. And I stood there, bathed in that soft, warm light, holding my tea, letting the silence settle in around me. Not heavy, not cold, just still, peaceful, whole, because I had survived, because I had fought, because I had protected Robert's wishes, my dignity, and the home we built, because I remembered who I was, and because, despite everything, my son had found his way back to me. So now, sitting here with my tea and the radio low in the background, I'll ask you what I wish someone had asked me years ago. Have you ever had to stand your ground when it would have been easier to stay quiet? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself? If you have, I see you. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because no matter how dark it gets, no matter how many storms come crashing in, there's always a light that comes back on. Sometimes it's as simple as the one in your kitchen.